once I was sort of standing on the start line, I was pretty excited to get going and get racing. My biggest sort of concern at that point, the thing I was most nervous about was leaving my daughter. I'd only ever really been away from her for a night before, so that was kind of the mental aspect was probably the thing that I was most worried about. In terms of the race, I was excited to see how I could do. I'd put in quite a lot of training. I knew I was physically well prepared for it. I also felt I was probably well prepared for the sleep deprivation because my daughter didn't really sleep very well. So I thought I could challenge the leaders and maybe even aim to try and win, but I was excited to get racing and give it a go.
Bhuannaich Jasmin and Rèis Spine an san úine as luaí díobh, chuigúd an díoch I thoiseach I den co-fharpaisich san darna áte.
When I sort of was thinking about what time I might be able to do, it's kind of a difficult thing in that race because it's so dependent, the speed you travel at is so dependent on weather conditions, and so really I was just aiming to try and finish as fast as I could and see what the weather threw at me.
Chanawn díadach go ring Jasmin a grách I the race an 8-3 údan. Fa fé mai go baine thar seachar da lenamh idan dalí a cúteach.
Well, I guess at the time it was just kind of a necessity. I was breastfeeding and I knew that I needed to express, otherwise I would end up with mastitis, and I just I did it. It took a bit of time during the first checkpoint and I lost a bit of time, but after that it was pretty quick. I guess because my milk production had dropped. Looking back, it's more that I sort of feel that it was good that I did it, that it sort of highlighted the issue of, it highlighted breastfeeding being kind of natural and normal and being part of our everyday lives as women with children. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I was able to kind of bring it and have people talking about it afterwards. I think that's a good thing.
An den Rèis uaireasach in Cluinnidh, a Jasmin a crutching go bhfuil nearst inching, ceas có cútramach na nearst physicach.
I think that's a huge part. I think you really can't underestimate the importance of the mental aspect of running ultra races. And that's probably, I think, part of the reason that women seem to do well relatively to men in these events, just because it's a lot of it is mental. So not only kind of the aspect of just being able to keep going when things get tough, but also looking after yourself. So in a race where you have to navigate and you have to keep yourself fed and you're running when you're very tired, I think it's really important that you do look after yourself, because ultimately if you get too cold then get hypothermic, then you drop out. So I think the mental aspect's really, really big.
Han suddervisach Jasmin it anichug internationte a horsí.
I think for me it was quite overwhelming, really. But I think I sort of tried to embrace it from the point of view of so many people got in touch to say they'd been inspired by my story. Ordinary people, ordinary, I feel ordinary myself. So that's what, I guess, maybe sort of my story resonated with people because I was, a breastfeeding mum. I work full time and so it was just sort of showing that you could still do these things if you really sort of put your mind to it and believe in yourself. Because I don't feel like I'm a particularly special athlete. I just think I'm sort of good at keeping going when things get tough and when putting my mind to something and believing in myself. So I think that I think everybody could do incredible things if they believe in themselves. Yeah.
A Janja na Suddervish had dúliat is an njójananach id nachgach san spars to Jasmin.
Yeah, so I think in some ways I was very fortunate. I came into sort of the fell running scene after a lot of that groundwork had been done. I'm under no illusions that it wasn't always kind of equal, but by the time I sort of started seriously fell running, it felt quite equal. We felt very welcome. There was I can still think of some races where there was, for example, a trophy for the first man and a trophy for the second man and not a trophy for the first woman. And I made my feelings about that quite clear. Especially as that particular race, I finished third overall that time. So there's still work to be done. In general, I think there's been real improvements. For example, the sky races and so on. There's a real sort of push to make everything kind of equal in terms of because in terms of prize money, but there are still some races, I can think of one in particular that received some coverage and had a lot of negative feedback from women that were asked to join the race, including myself, where they were offering much lower prize money for the women and a shorter course over multiple days. You know, we argued that in ultra races, women can just run just as far as the men, and there's no reason to offer for lower prize money. Their argument was there's fewer women in the sport, so there should be, you know, and I don't agree with that, because you'll never get more women in the sport if you don't offer equal treatment. And there are still some ways to go in terms of, for example, there are some sort of well-known races that still don't offer kind of any help for women that, for example, are pregnant. So there's some races quite hard to get into, and you might get a place, but then if you get pregnant, then you lose that place, for example, rather than being able to defer it. They also don't have any sort of allowance for you if you get pregnant in terms of the number of years that you can accumulate sort of these races that require, you know, that help you get an entry. They don't make any sort of allowances if you're pregnant for a year, for example. So there is still some way to go, because I think that women that are sort of of an age where they'll be competing are also frequently of an age where they'll be having children. And from personal experience, I have to say that it makes it hard enough taking a year out to have a baby, but if you then also have to deal with the fact that you've lost your various entry points for races because you were off a year, that's an added challenge. So I think there's still a long way to go, but there's definitely been improvements in the time that I've been racing.
Hadda siad a glasach, hansealach ag Jasmin Paris, agus I dola cumulora a rui, called the imbe hewlich.
So I had my son 4 months ago exactly, so yeah, and I'm sort of getting back into training again now, which is really fun. What happens next year is obviously very dependent on what happens with coronavirus and the vaccine and so on, and whether races take place. If they do, then I definitely have some plans for some kind of racing in the UK and to some extent at least one or two races abroad. And if coronavirus just kind of put a stop to those things, then there's been quite an increase in the number of fastest known time sort of record attempts this year on the kind of ultra running scene in the UK, and I think abroad as well, simply because that's something that people can still do when their you know, races have been cancelled. So there's various sort of record attempts in the British mountains that I would quite like to have a go at. So if racing is called off, then I'll do that next year if I can.